Hello, good morning, children. Welcome back to the online classes. Today, we are going to start the next lesson, that is a visit to Cambridge. In this story, we read the conversation between two great personalities. They are Stephen Hawking and Firdaus Kanga. Let us know about the author. Firdaus Kanga was born in Mumbai. He is a writer and actor who lives in London. He is a writer as well as actor. He is basically from India. Now he lives in London. He has authored Trying to Grow. His book is Trying to Grow, a semi autobiographical novel set in India, and a travel book, Heaven on Wheels, about his experience in UK. He wrote his experience in UK, that is Heaven on Wheels. These are the two great books written by Firdaus Kanga. Let us know about the lesson. The two great men exchanged thoughts on what it means to live life in a wheelchair. In this lesson, we read the thoughts exchanged by the two great men, Stephen Hawking and Firdaus Kanga, about their life in a wheelchair and on how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. People's view about the differently abled persons. How people think about the differently abled or physically challenged people. Right? This is the story of a travelogue, both of them disabled or differently abled, as we now say. Earlier, we would call the physically challenged people by using the word disabled, but now we call them differently able, as we are as they are having the changed dimension. We call them differently abled. They are efficient like others. Stephen Hawking is one of the greatest scientists of our time. He suffers from a form of paralysis that confines him to a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer, which speaks for him in a machine like voice. Stephen Hawking is a scientist of our time. He is suffering from a form of paralysis. His body couldn't move except his fingers, so he uses his fingers to communicate with others by punching buttons on a computer that gives the voice like machine. Firdaus Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives in and works in Mumbai. Kanga was born with brittle bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. Like Hawking, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. One more person, author of this story, Firdaus Kanga, was a journalist. He works in Mumbai. Kanga was born with brittle bones, very sensitive bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. So he also moves in a wheelchair. Let us know the brief summary of the lesson. This is a story about meeting between two differently abled people. Both were extraordinary in their fields. Stephen Hawking was a great scientist, though he suffers from paralysis. Stephen Hawking is differently abled person. He suffers from a paralysis even though he worked in the field of science, right? He can speak only through the computer and confined to a wheelchair. Firdaus Kanga, the writer and journalist from Mumbai, was born with very weak and easily breakable bones. He took moves around in a wheelchair. Author of this story, Firdaus Kanga, is a journalist and he lives in Mumbai. He was born with very weak bones, breakable bones. He took moves around in a wheelchair, so he uses wheelchair. Both met in England at Stephen's place. They discussed about the point of view of normal people for differently abled. The writer Firdaus was on a walking tour through Cambridge to UK. Both Stephen Hawking and Firdaus Kanga met in England. They discussed about the thoughts of people, their the attitude of the people towards the physically challenged persons or differently abled persons. This is all about the introduction of the lesson. In the next session, we will start the first episode of this story. Listen this.